Hi, everyone, and welcome to another episode of DMV Confidential. I'm Kenzie Chase.
And I'm Jenny Gable.
And today, like always, we have another episode for you. The story we want to talk to you guys about has a lot of twists and turns, evidence, questions, all the things. It is a story that has sort of taken the DC area by a storm and has been the talk for us, at least, for quite a bit. So today we want to talk to you guys about the au pair affair murder.
Yeah, so this definitely has to be probably one of the craziest cases I feel like I've ever heard, but especially working here, you hear a lot of crazy things in news, and this case, which we'll get into, was definitely crazy, but it all started back in February 2023 in Fairfax County when Fairfax County Police went to a home in the 13200 block of Stablebrook Way on the morning of February 24th, 2023. And that's when they found a man named Joseph Ryan, 39 years old, who had been shot to death. And there was also a woman who was in the home who had been stabbed, and she actually was taken to the hospital where she died.
Yes, Christine Banfield.
Yes.
So Christine Banfield and Joseph Ryan were actually found at the home by Christine's husband, Brendan Banfield. What Brendan told police what happened is he left early that day to get to work because he was preparing for a promotion. So he left a little bit earlier just to make sure that he had enough time to set up and get everything ready for this possible promotion presentation. The family also had this Brazilian au pair living with them. And the au pair, for those of you guys who don't know, that is someone usually taken from a foreign country, sort of becomes a live-in nanny. The au pair took the Banfield's young 4-year-old daughter, and she was supposed to take her to the zoo. So both Brendan and the au pair were out of the house around 7 a.m. that day. Brendan, meanwhile, went to McDonald's to get breakfast. He went through the drive-thru, and then eventually he had to go to the bathroom. So he went back into McDonald's and went to the bathroom, and that's when he received a call from the family's au pair.
Yeah, so that's when he told police that he received a call from the family's au pair, Juliana Perez Magales. He said that she called him because she was getting ready to take the daughter to the zoo, the 4-year-old daughter, when she said she saw someone she didn't know enter the home, and Christine was in the home at the time. That's Brendan's wife. And so she called him saying she was concerned, and so he told her that he would be right there. So he headed to the house, and they actually, this is the interesting part, went back into the home together. Again, like you said, Kenzie, she had plans to take the daughter to the zoo that day, but they ended up going back into the home together, and they left the 4-year-old daughter in the basement.
Right, which is already bad call, because if you don't know this man that's entering your house for whatever reason, why would you bring your 4-year-old daughter to the home, even if she's in the basement? Like, I would want the 4-year-old daughter as far away as possible while I figured this out. Anyway, Brendan walks in. He's investigating this, and this is important. He was a IRS police officer, so he had his government-issued weapon as well. He comes into the home. He hears what he believes to be sexual noises coming from the bedroom. Now, this kind of at first reaffirms what he was already thinking, which this could potentially be an affair, which is what Brandon said he thought was potentially the cause when he first got the call. As he starts going up the stairs, he says he quickly realized this was not an affair, and these noises that were coming from the room were not that of sex.
Yeah. So he hears these noises, and he becomes concerned. So that's when he says he draws his service weapon and goes into the room. And that's when he told police that he actually saw 39-year-old Joseph Ryan with a knife standing behind Christine, and that she was naked at the time in the room. And that the knife that he had actually was partially covered by the hair on Christine's neck.
Right, so he was saying he didn't quite know that it was a knife at first, but that Christine told him he's got a knife. And then he tries to get Joseph Ryan to drop the knife, repeat commands, said he was a police officer, repeat commands to drop the knife. Then he says he witnessed sort of a forward slashing motion, at least on 2 separate occasions. So 2 slash marks from Joseph Ryan before he finally shot him.
Yeah, and that's when actually the au pair, Juliana, she entered the room and she grabbed Brendan's gun from the safe that they had in the bedroom. And that's when she saw Joseph Ryan kind of moving around a little bit after
Yes.
Brendan had actually
Brendan said
shot.
that Joseph Ryan was moving and sort of made a striking motion to hit him. And that's
Yes.
when Juliana then shot him in the chest.
Yeah.
And he had officially stopped moving. Now, Brendan's account of this also talks about what was going on with Christine during all of this. Well, Christine told Brandon that Joseph Ryan had a knife. She also called for them to call 911.
She said, "I love you,"
Yes.
as well.
As she was bleeding out, she said she loved Brandon. She also told him to put some pressure on the wound at one point as she feels herself bleeding out. So she says quite a bit of things.
And he also kind of mentioned to investigators that, again, he didn't know Joseph Ryan.
Right.
But he told
this
them
was
that
a complete stranger to the home.
But that him and his wife had both previously had issues in their marriage, both had affairs, and that she had expressed interest in something, he said, expressed interest in rough sex. So that is what his kind of story was. He initially thought that this man was in their home for an affair.
Right. And speaking of affairs, because we haven't mentioned it yet, but Brandon had a little secret of his own. Him and this au pair were actually in an affair themselves.
Yeah, so actually, Kenzie, it kind of leads into the point of more than 7 months after this took place, Christine died from her injuries. Joseph Ryan died as well, as we said earlier. More than 7 months later, in October of 2023, that au pair, Juliana, was actually arrested. And at the time of her arrest, investigators noticed that the bedroom that she previously was in, her items had been moved
Right,
to Brendan's
so-
bedroom. There was a photo of them on the nightstand together. So they had been having an
within
affair.
7 months after Christine's death, they took their affair to a completely new level.
Yeah.
Where it went from just behind Christine's back to not really having to do anything behind anyone's back. The au pair, like you mentioned, Jenny, moved her clothes into the closet, had a picture up on their nightstand.
Yeah.
Very up in the open about them now being together 100%, which is obviously for investigators looking into this is suspicious, which I think is what led to her arrest.
Yeah, a lot of times as we see in these cases, investigators are looking, at the interpersonal relationships that people have and a potential motive, seeing that they had been having an affair and then so shortly after this had taken place. Again, he told investigators his wife died in this tragic intruder situation. Now him and the au pair seeming to live together as a couple in the home. Definitely a red flag for them. So she was arrested, and due to the nature of the crime, she again was from Brazil, being a potential flight risk. She was actually denied bond at the time, so she was sitting in jail for quite some time.
Right. And during this time in jail, investigators and prosecutors are really trying to nail Brandon, who they believe was also involved. And so throughout Juliana's time in prison, they offer her multiple deals as a way to get her to sort of testify against Brendan in this case. And for the most part, she refuses. But as the time goes on, she remains in prison, and her mental health begins to take a toll.
Yeah, so you can kind of see from some letters that she had sent, because again, she was in prison for quite some time. There was one specific letter dated from November 21st, 2023, where she said, quote, "I don't want to live like this. I don't want to keep living, keep going. I would rather get myself sick or something worse to happen to me than living without you, and I mean it." And that is a letter that she sent to Brendan after being in jail. Another one, quote, "I just want this to be over in one way or another, good or bad. I'll never understand why they treat us like this," end
Right.
quote.
And throughout this whole process, again, Juliana was kind of a ride or die. She expresses that they're innocent in her letters. She expresses love for Brendan. And Brendan's also supporting her. In fact, him and his mother were the ones providing the attorney that was helping Juliana in this case. Well, I think throughout all of this, Juliana eventually gets pretty fed up with the lawyer, pretty fed up being in jail, taking the fall, and just doesn't really think it's worth it, especially once prosecutors offer what some would call a sweetheart deal. She would be testifying against Brendan Banfield. And in exchange, prosecutors would, one, downgrade her charges from second-degree murder to manslaughter, which is an insane downgrade. And then two, they would recommend to the judge time served. So whatever time she was in jail, she would basically walk free if the judge granted this recommendation.
Which is really important to note, Kenzie, how you said the recommendation. It's not a set in stone. It's just they're recommending to the judges that if she testifies in this way, that she can walk free after. But that's really, in the end, up to the judge's discretion, which we'll talk about more later.
And Juliana knew all of this. So with this is kind of their smoking gun. And Juliana, the au pair, becomes the prosecutor's star witness. And that brings us into the trial because, of course, they have a star witness now, and they arrest Brendan Banfield. And this is the part that gets really crazy. Everything that gets brought up during this trial. Everything already was crazy, but what led up to the murders and everything that comes with it is just wild to me.
Yeah, so it was definitely insane. So getting into that, Kenzie, prosecutors kind of give this storyline of what they believe actually happened versus what Brendan Banfield said actually happened. So it kind of centered around this elaborate plot for him and the au pair Juliana to end up together. He mentioned, they believe it's because he didn't want to share custody of the 4-year-old daughter that they had and didn't want to divorce due to financial reasons.
Which is a crazy explanation.
Yeah. So they believe that him and Juliana kind of conspired together and made this elaborate scheme to basically use Joseph Ryan as a scapegoat in the murder of Christine.
And this plot first came up when Juliana and Brendan were on a New York trip. He mentioned the first thoughts of getting rid of his wife. And Juliana at first didn't believe him. But then Brendan keeps bringing this up. At one point talking about getting a hitman and then deciding not to do that because that would be too traceable. So then they come up with this elaborate plot, like you mentioned, Jenny, where they decide that they are going to find Joseph Ryan through a fetish website called FetLife. And through this resource, they basically convinced Joseph Ryan to enact a stranger rape fantasy.
Yeah, so they create a fake Gmail account for Christine. This is according to the prosecutor. And that way they're able to go onto the website and get in contact. And they start talking to different people on this website, trying to find someone who would be almost the perfect pawn in a way for the plot to work. And that's when they start communicating with Joseph Ryan.
Right, so prosecutors are accusing him of, one, creating the Gmail account, posing as his wife, Christine, then actively seeking out someone to do this stranger rape fantasy. And these are the sort of the terms. They couldn't meet in person ahead of time. It's
really mind-boggling to think of. But I guess, for the prosecutors and what they were trying to do would make sense, obviously.
Right. They couldn't meet in person ahead of time. So there are messages between this Christine profile and Joseph Ryan where they talk about this exchange and the specifications of it. He has to bring his own knife, leave his phone in the car. She doesn't want to meet up in person prior because that would ruin the fantasy. All of these things should raise some red flags, and I think it definitely does for prosecutors who are looking at this saying, what woman would reasonably want to enact this fantasy with someone that they've never met, have them bring their own knife, have them leave their phone in the car,
just enter the house through the unlocked door.
Right.
I believe they mentioned that Christine apparently told him, even if I act afraid, don't stop. It's all part of the plan. So again, Joseph Ryan believed that he had been communicating with Christine and that this was consensual.
Right. And at one point they even had spoken on the phone.
Yes.
They had spoken on the phone, which prosecutors were later determined that was potentially Juliana. That was on the phone. Due to a
potential accent that he had mentioned. Mm-hmm. And again, as we said, Juliana was from Brazil. So
all of the stuff leading up to it, Jenny, I want to also talk about because prosecutors bring up several things that all circumstantial but look incriminating when you put them all together. Juliana and Brendan went to the gun range in the months leading up to the murder.
I believe it was the gun range. Someone from the gun range had testified that they had seen them there, which, again, thinking about this is supposed to be her boss. She's a live-in nanny taking care of the daughter. That's the reason that she's there. I don't believe we mentioned this either, but there is also a pretty large age gap, I believe of about 15 years. So definitely, some would say a power dynamic in that situation, because Juliana's not from this country. She was living here in their home as their live-in nanny. But why would they be going to the gun range together? That doesn't really seem like something you
So
do.
Juliana takes the stand, and she's telling all of these things that led up to the murder, all these conversations, this FetLife account that they created together, these messages that they sent together. She also describes what happens on the actual day. So she said that she was meant to stake out the home, and that Brendan was just going to wait at McDonald's for an extended period of time, waiting for her call. Then Juliana sees Joseph Ryan go into the home while she's staking it out, and then she calls Brendan, and it's go time, essentially. They come back to the house, and Juliana was there as sort of backup in a way, in case something went wrong. Joseph Ryan was not actually doing anything wrong, according to Juliana. In fact, it was Brendan who walked in. Christine did, in fact, say this man has a knife, but then it was Brendan who immediately shot Joseph Ryan and then took the knife and then stabbed his wife.
I believe the au pair described in court how she saw when Brendan kind of turned to his wife, she kind of covered her ears, tried to look away during that moment when Brendan stabbed his own wife several times and killed her in their home.
Right. So on one account, we have Brendan Banfield's story where he walked in, Joseph Ryan had already stabbed his wife, and he shot him after, and then she had already bled out. She was already bleeding out. Versus Juliana's story, which says he was the one who shot Joseph Ryan and then proceeded to stab his wife to death.
And I don't know if we had mentioned this part because there's just so many details to this case, but before Brendan left, that he was the one that, apparently unlocked the door and actually hid Christine's phone in a drawer downstairs, which is just all very calculated.
Exactly.
Which is just, and then after he stabbed her, prosecutor said and the au pair testified that he kind of manipulated Joseph Ryan's body so that the blood was on him.
Right. So we're going to actually play a clip briefly of Brendan Banfield on the stand talking about his wife.
He was attacking Christine. I wish I shot him earlier. Christine told me that she was bleeding out and that she was sorry and that she loved me.
So I want to mention something real quick of what he said, because he actually brings up something that the prosecutors immediately poke holes in. And he mentions how Christine said that she loves him.
She's saying
and that
all these
she
different
was
things.
Bleeding out. And this is something that stood out to me. It stood out to the prosecutors. Jenny, I'm assuming it stood out to you as well. When prosecutors go to cross-examine him, they are actually able to ask him questions about this, because he describes only seeing 2 stab wounds. Well, Christine was actually found with at least 6 stab wounds in her neck, in her area, which means by the time she is saying all these things to Brendan Banfield, she would have already had to have at least 4 to 5 stabbings already in her neck. And then by the end of it, when she's saying I love you and that she's bleeding out, she would have to have all 6 wounds in her neck, saying I love you, he has a knife, I'm bleeding out, all these things.
And something else that's crazy about that, Kenzie, which I know we were talking about it, and you might have touched on it a little bit earlier as well in the episode, but that Brendan could only account for the fact that he saw his wife get stabbed or slashed about 2 times, but then they found her with several stab wounds, and it doesn't seemingly add up between that and her being able to converse in between.
Right, exactly. So Brendan's explanation for a lot of this is he said that his wife, Christine, had prior affairs before. So the idea of her having an affair while he got the call at McDonald's was not surprising. So he was just really going back just to investigate as a precaution. He also said that Christine had an interest for rough sex, which we mentioned earlier. So the defense attorneys are trying to paint a different picture. They're completely denying this catfishing theory that the prosecutors have come up, where they posed as Christine, they asked this guy to come. Instead, they're trying to argue that Christine set this whole thing up, and this was just a quote,
almost like a big misunderstanding,
a sex fantasy gone wrong type of thing. And I don't really know that the jury is buying it.
Yeah, so that kind of leads to more of the harder evidence that was presented in court. So then that's kind of when they talk about the scene specifically and kind of the blood that was found, which we're showing here, and some of the images are pretty graphic. That was the knife, as you can see, that Joseph Ryan, prosecutor, said was instructed to bring. That's the blood on the carpet, and I believe those are the jeans that Joseph Ryan was wearing as well. So they're kind of examining that. Terry Leach, who was the crime scene detective that day, said that the blood soaked through the carpet, through the foam pad, and onto the subfloor, and that it was just a very, very brutal scene in the bedroom that day. And they also, this is a little bit of a sidebar, but this part was just crazy to me. They actually had a window manufacturer who testified.
Right.
And this part just really blew my mind because he said that Brendan Banfield had purchased triple pane windows.
Which is unusual for homeowners who would usually go for like more of a double paned. So
yeah.
I'm not like a window expert, but basically triple pane, for those of you who don't necessarily know, are like a thicker window, essentially.
Almost like a soundproof.
Right.
Like a very thick window. And he said that homeowners, like you said, they usually get double pane, and that he purchased these, like, I believe sometime in the summer of 2023. So this would have been some months before. And the fact that, you know, he remembered that because it must be pretty unusual.
Right. And Brendan Banfield argued that, oh, well, Christine and I had made a decision to purchase those windows way before there was any affair that even happened. But it's still a little odd, triple paned windows, where this horrific scene later occurred.
And then I know that we were kind of showing some of the images of the blood, that you could see a very, very bloody scene. That also kind of leads to Christine's father, who actually briefly testified as well. And he mostly just said that Christine, you know, she had a blood disorder. So this kind of idea that the Brendan and the defense were painting, that Christine was just wanting to engage in rough sex or knife play. He said that that wouldn't be like his daughter because she had a blood disorder, and that would be dangerous for her.
And obviously Brendan knew that she had a blood disorder, and she would know that she had a blood disorder. So why would she then ask someone to come to the home with a knife for potential knife play when she had something that was this serious?
Yeah, and something else as well that was definitely brought up in court that was a bit striking to me, when they were trying to kind of poke holes in this, is that no DNA from Joseph Ryan was actually found on Brendan Banfield, or no DNA from Brendan was actually found on Joseph Ryan, excuse me. But there also, on that note, there was body cam footage as well of Brendan Banfield in the hospital when these murders took place, kind of very distraught seeming. He finds out that Christine died from her injuries, and you actually see him wash his hands of the blood as well, because he, you know, was covered in blood.
You just reminded me, Jenny, about something else that prosecutors noted is Christine, as you know, obviously Brendan's account is that she's saying all these things, put pressure on my neck, put blah, blah, blah. But then, you know, he eventually calls 911, and the 911 calls are important because there are two 911 calls, about 15 minutes apart. And from Juliana's explanation, Juliana said that Christine asked her to call 911, and then Juliana did, and then Brendan told her hang up. It wasn't until after Christine was bleeding out, Joseph Ryan was shot, that then Brendan Banfield gave Juliana the okay to call 911 again.
Which I think really kind of helps prosecutors paint that timeline, Kenzie. That's a really good point, of that about 15-minute gap in between, to kind of see what actually happened and how they were manipulating the scene to make it look like something else.
And Juliana explained that on the day of the murders, she actually was carrying Brendan's other gun. So he had 2 guns. He had a service issue gun, and then he had his personal gun, a Glock 43X. And Juliana was actually carrying one of those on the day of the murders because, again, she was staking out the home. When she came and she drew the gun and she fired that shot that we know that she did at Joseph Ryan, they staged the scene a little bit to make it look like she had pulled that gun from the safe when she really had it on her, at least according to Juliana's testimony.
Which aligns with what Brendan said. Oh, she went and got the gun from the safe to kind of help because they realized that this man was an intruder and it was a dangerous situation.
It's overall a crazy story from both accounts. You have Brendan, who is painting this as a sex fantasy gone wrong. She was having an affair, wasn't unusual. He came back. He tried to be the savior. It didn't work out. He made some poor decisions as far as not shooting sooner, but he did all the best he could. Meanwhile, you have Juliana's testimony that is probably the most horrific story we've ever heard of a malicious, intentional, calculated plot to catfish this man, an innocent man, then all this plotting that went in on the day of the murders, then shooting, the actual shooting and stabbing of both victims, and then the cover-up.
And then living in the home
And then
afterwards
living in the home.
as seemingly as a family for several months. And that kind of reminds me as well of we talked about earlier with that fake Gmail account. That was something else that was kind of brought up in court as well because they weren't able to really, digital forensics definitely played a role here, and they weren't able to really see prove exactly who was behind the computer.
Digital forensic will show whose device did what when.
But not who is behind.
Who is behind the device. And that's something that both the defense and the prosecutors were playing with throughout the court of these messages were sent during a time when Christine was home. Oh, well, these messages were sent during a time when Brandon was not home. So trying to paint a picture of, oh, well, this could be incriminating, or, oh, this is not incriminating. It's interesting that you mentioned that because that was a big role as far as the messages that were sent and whose phone it was being sent from. Overall, just a very, very confusing and frustrating case. And it makes sense why it took investigators this long until the au pair was willing to testify to be able to actually bring Brandon into the courtroom.
Yeah, and that kind of goes into more how prosecutors were trying to say that this case more so revolved around the blood evidence or the digital forensics, but it really kind of ended up being whose story did the jurors believe?
Exactly. Who was believable? This husband who had an affair, but then goes on the stand and says how much he loves his wife and how this affair really meant nothing to them. Although he did say at one point when prosecutors asked him about problems that he had in his relationship with Juliana, he even says, oh, well, we were having a hard time because Christine was still around. And I think that was maybe like a smoking gun for prosecutors as well, that he admits that they couldn't have a real relationship while his wife was still in the picture.
Which, again, he had the choice to testify, which is also something you don't typically, that was mind-boggling to me as well.
He has the right to plead the fifth and to not testify himself. But I honestly think, Jenny, that because the au pair went and testified, that he felt he had
to
no
share
choice.
his side as well.
Right, exactly. And it was a matter of who did the jury believe more. Well, ultimately, the jury believes Juliana. And Brendan Banfield is found guilty. So I'm going to play a clip of that.
Case number FE 2024-666, count 1. We, the jury on the issue, join in the case of the Commonwealth of Virginia versus Brendan Robert Banfield, defendant, find the defendant guilty of aggravated murder of Joseph Ryan and Christine Banfield as part of the same act or transaction. Case number
I feel like just kind of seeing his reaction as well was something interesting to me because you could almost see in that clip his eyes widened for a second, but he really just kept this stoic, emotionlessness to him.
Yes,
Why
and
this is
he
being
had
read.
that pretty much expression the whole time during his own testimony. Very emotionless for someone who just lost his wife, who says how much he loved his wife despite their challenges in their marriage. He was also, because of his conviction, he wasn't just found guilty of aggravated murder, which is one of the most serious charges of murder. He was also found guilty of child endangerment and a firearm charge, which the child endangerment comes from the fact that the daughter was in the basement during all of this, which is so baffling to me for all of this because
I mean, she's 4 years old too, and
it's a 4-year, yes.
4-year-olds are aware of things as well. You can have memories from when you're 4 years old, and that's something that I kind of think of, the fact that it was dangerous for her to be in the house to begin with. This is a horrible thing, but then it's just awful.
Right.
There's no other way to describe it.
And no matter whose story you guys find believable, this part never sat right with me, because whether or not you thought that this was an affair going on, or you thought that this was the murder, or this was you planning this murder, why would you leave your 4-year-old daughter in the basement? Unless, like what the jury probably realized, is he needed Juliana to be there. Yeah. And it would be suspicious for him to send his daughter away with someone else when the family has a live-in nanny to watch the kids.
I think it really just goes to show, which, again, aggravated murder charge, just how calculated this was, how calculated the entire plan was to really paint Joseph Ryan, again, a completely innocent person, a stranger to them, as the one who killed Christine, really kind of frame him. All these details and the way that they completely planned it out over this period.
Right, and Jenny, this happened in 2023. So for 3 years, they're painting this picture that Joseph Ryan was a rapist and a murderer.
And it's really more so, I think of the phrase, like, in the wrong place. Like, he was just in the wrong place.
Yes. Joseph Ryan, for whatever you might think of this sexual fantasy, was innocent. He did not come to the home with the intent to do anything non-consensual. He even did his part, I feel, with trying to speak on the phone.
Yeah.
And later finding out that it was Juliana on the phone with him. But he tried to meet up.
He thought this was
other candidates, in fact, were denied because they insisted upon meeting in person or insisted upon certain things. But Joseph Ryan happened to be the one that agreed, showed up to this house believing that he had already spoken with this woman, that this was all part of the plan, only to find himself murdered, and then the scapegoat of a very serious plot murder. It's
awful, and I think it kind of just goes back to that selfish, I can just think of like selfishness is what I think of. They wanted to be together, and it's like at any cost.
And divorce.
Christine's death, Joseph Ryan, doesn't matter. That's what, that was the end goal. And like you said, Kenzie, divorce, I believe he mentioned for financial reasons, didn't want to lose money, didn't want to share custody.
Now he is in jail, and
yes.
the child's mother is dead. So now neither of them have custody or get to see this child. It is so beyond heartbreaking that I can't even fathom that this is like an option for people.
And it's trying to understand that line of thinking too. Like, what even compels you to think, like, just divorce is an option? I don't know why that would even cross your mind. And I don't know if we mentioned this, but him and Christine were, I believe, together for like 18 years, high school sweethearts, or
yes.
They were together in college. So this is a very lengthy relationship. They had this daughter together. It's just...
Right, and during his, while he was actually on the stand, the prosecutors also mentioned his other affairs, including one of his best friend's wife, which he had an affair with, and one woman who prosecutors say that he found this woman on a fetish website. And I know why they probably used the term fetish website, because that's what they're calling FetLife, as a fetish website, which is the same place that they found Joseph Ryan. And prosecutors were saying, like, oh, you found this lady to have an affair with on a fetish website. He denied that. He said it wasn't a fetish website. And instead he called it an arranged relationship, which is baffling, because all this effort to have an affair with people, is crazy to me.
It doesn't make any sense. But I think that kind of leaves us wondering, well, what's going to happen with Juliana?
Right. Well, Juliana actually is an interesting case because, again, she had her charges in exchange for her testimony. She had her charges downgraded. So she is no longer facing murder charges. She is facing manslaughter charges, which in Virginia holds a maximum sentence of 10 years. But, usually in these cases, you never really get the maximum sentence. And you have to remember that the attorneys made an agreement that they would recommend a time served recommendation to the judge.
Because she had already been in prison up until this point.
Right,
so
'cause she remained
if this
in
goes the
prison.
way that she's hoping, she would just be able to walk free practically after this. And
Now,
she, as you
yes.
said, Kenzie, she has that manslaughter charge because of the shots that she fired at Joseph Ryan.
Right. But this judge isn't really buying it. She's a tough cookie. She is actually, this is a side note that Jenny and I talk about all the time now because ever since I found out, she's actually the same judge that served on for a different big case, but this one's civil. She's the same judge that served for the Johnny Depp Amber Heard civil case.
That was, I know we were both when we found that out.
Yes.
Like, that is just crazy in
Right.
itself.
So Judge Penny Azcarate decides that she is not going to grant Juliana this time served recommendation. And we're going to play a clip of Juliana talking and then what the judge had to say in response.
God, I found the forgiveness and mercy. I will live with this for the rest of my life. God and I only know the shame and guilt and sorrow I carry for all I have caused.
You do not deserve anything other than incarceration and a life of reflection on what you have done to the victim and this family. May it weigh heavily on your soul. So today I'm sentencing you on a manslaughter charge because that's what's before me. And the facts of this case demonstrate an intentional and calculated level of violence that is the most serious manslaughter scenario that this court has ever seen.
God, I found
The most serious manslaughter charge the
Yes.
court has ever
Can you
seen.
imagine what cases this judge has seen? And this is the most serious manslaughter charge she's ever seen. Well, because
Yeah.
it's not. She originally was charged with murder, right?
And I think just that's a portion of Juliana's statement at the end that you can see she's very emotional, which just noting that throughout the trial, you didn't really get much emotion
Right.
from her. And then in this moment, before she's sentenced, she really kind of she's like, you can see tears streaming down her face, almost like a breakdown. But the judge is really just not having it. And she lists 10 specific reasons
Right.
why
I wanna
Juliana
go
got
through-
this maximum charge.
I want to go through those lists,
Sentencing.
Jenny. I'm gonna take the first 3. We'll hand it off to you. The first reason that she lists is Juliana showed zero remorse for the victim up until the day of her sentencing. Number 2, she was not forthcoming even in her testimony about the full extent that she was involved. Quote, "The plan would not have worked without your total and full involvement." Then she says 3, having a loaded firearm in her pocket on the days of the murder.
And the fact that, like we were talking about earlier, that they brought the Banfield's 4-year-old daughter into the basement knowing that 2 people were about to be murdered, including her own mother, Christine. Number 5, hearing Christine ask the au pair to call 911, which Juliana did, but then immediately hung up. And number 6, Juliana seeing Joseph Ryan, who had been shot in the head at the time, still moving, trying to wake up, and then as he laid on the ground dying, she shot him again, firing that final shot, killing him. And number 7, her watching Brendan stab his own wife over and over again while she was just in the room being complacent.
Right. 8, waiting 15 minutes before redialing 911, like we mentioned earlier. She dialed twice. 9, telling a fabricated story for over a year and a half that Joseph Ryan, an innocent man, was a rapist and a murderer. And 10, telling the child it was okay to call you mommy hours after the murders.
I think that's the part that really just made me sick to my stomach,
It was
because
chilling
you
to
can
have her.
you can see how she's seemingly so emotional, and she says that she's going to carry this for the rest of her life, and only God knows how much sorrow she feels, and she's so sorry. She apologizes to Joseph Ryan's family. They actually gave victim impact statements as well. We didn't include it in the clip, but they were very emotional over their family member being painted in this horrible way.
Right. We heard from Joseph Ryan's mother. During Juliana's sentencing, we heard from Joseph Ryan's mother and his aunt. And both of them were just so distraught. And the reason why we didn't hear from any of Christine Banfield's parents was because Juliana was only charged with manslaughter in connection to Joseph Ryan's death, not Christine Banfield. So only Joseph Ryan's family was able to give victim impact statements. But there is still Brendan Banfield's trial.
Yeah, so he actually has sentencing coming up in a few months. It's actually scheduled for May 6, 2026. And his trial, his convictions actually come with a maximum penalty of life in prison without the possibility of parole, plus an additional 13 years.
Right. And Jenny, I actually think it's May 8th.
Oh, May 8th, excuse me. May 8th, 2026.
But
yeah,
yes.
so he's facing being in prison for the rest of his life in connection with this.
Which is rightfully so. Whether you... I just want to take a step back, because this whole case, we've been covering it since pretty much the beginning. And it is just a story that has so much to unpack. I don't even know if we've been able to unpack everything
There's
in this
so many
hour-long
details.
episode.
Yeah.
Because there are just so many crazy things that happened. Trust, betrayal. I mean, I can't even imagine, like, the thought and the meticulous effort, the calculated effort, the premeditated effort to put this all together. And what the judge said, even in reference to Juliana, like, this could not have been done without both of them.
And didn't she kind of explain that she didn't think that it would actually
Right.
happen? Which, again, you play a critical role. She was in the room when Christine was stabbed. She hung
when
up.
she's giving her, like, statement to the judge before she's sentenced, she says, like, something along the lines of, like, I hope one day you'll understand that I truly did not believe his plan would actually happen. But Juliana was there for every single step of it.
She even spoke to Joseph Ryan on the phone.
She was there for the months leading up to it. She was there for the weeks leading up to it. She was there to find Joseph Ryan. She was there on the day of. She was one of the ones who shot a gun on the day of. There was plenty of opportunity for things to have gone a different direction for both Christine, the au pair, Brendan, and for Joseph Ryan.
Yeah, and I think really just touching on it briefly, the lack of remorse. The judge mentioned really she only had this emotion, remorse seeming on the day that she was sentenced. But she, it's really when she was facing that prison, she's really facing that is when she becomes emotional, but not
Right.
throughout discussing the rest of these horrific details, and not when she was living with Brendan for about 7 months after Christine had just been murdered.
Right. And again, throughout all of this, there was a 4-year-old daughter who was just innocent, thinking she was going to go to the zoo that day, and instead lost one of her parents to another. And I think that is just the most heartbreaking thing when you realize that this 4-year-old child is going to grow up now without her mother at the hands of her father.
Now
And
she's going to grow up without him as well.
Yes.
It's awful.
It is truly the case that is so sad, so baffling. All the details, all of the stuff that went into it. I mean, we've covered a lot of cases, but nothing like this. Nothing as detailed, as premeditated, and as just vicious.
Very gruesome.
Yes.
Very.
That involved not just one, but 2 people, both in victims and in suspects.
That a very meticulous plan. I just, the word calculated just keeps popping into my head. Very, very calculated in the way that they planned this all out. There was a lot of time to think, maybe for her to put a stop to it.
There was a lot of time to change your mind, even the day of. And something we didn't even mention yet, but when we talked about this promotion that that Brendan Banfield said he was going to have, well, his boss testified that there wasn't even a promotion ready for him that day.
And the outfit that he was seen wearing, there was some footage of him at the McDonald's. He mentioned that that's not something you would wear to a very important work meeting.
Right.
So it doesn't align.
And the fact that Brendan Banfield went on the stand and testified knowing that he wasn't innocent. I mean, the prosecutors were able to poke holes in multiple different things in his testimony. In the fact that Christine supposedly said all of these words with all of the stab wounds in her neck. The fact that he said that he used a towel to help stop the bleeding, only for the towel to have very little blood on it.
I think it really just goes to show that point of his testimony really could have made or broke the case. If he was being honest, that great, testify. But him testifying and giving all these details, I know you had even mentioned, Kenzie, that some things he gave details about were very, very specific.
Right.
Like about ordering on the McDonald's app
Yes,
and
he
things
gave
like
random
that.
specifics about things that probably didn't need him to go into detail about.
But giving all of these specifics for what you said happened makes it, I feel like, easier for prosecutors to be able to find those holes when they're analyzing the big picture, especially with the au pair's testimony. Again, this is someone who was very close to him. They know that they had been having an affair. They were living together after the murder. So her testimony was really just kind of the smoking gun. That is what convinced jurors.
Yes. And regardless of all of this, I mean, the real person, at the end of the day, I mean, Christine Banfield was a nurse. She was someone who spent her days helping people and ended up losing her life at the hand of her own husband.
And I think that that's really important you mentioned, Kenzie, because we talk about a lot of these cases and a lot of them are very brutal and they're interesting to talk about, but I think that we can kind of lose sight of the real people who were actually impacted by these things, especially when stories like this make national headlines. But this was a real family who was impacted, and this is a real woman, a mother, and a real little girl who's now not going to have her parents around, and it's just an awful situation.
Right. So we are obviously going to be paying attention to Brendan Banfield's Brendan Banfield's sentencing and figuring out what the judge ultimately decides. But this is something that we finally get to bring to you guys, full case and story, but it's also available on our website, dcnewsnow.com. We have plenty of coverage that will go into all of the details, some of which we didn't even get to today. It'll also show you the full sentencing hearing, the full list that the judge goes, the reaction that Brendan Banfield has. All of that is available on dcnewsnow.com.
And if you want to hear more cases like this from around the DC area, be sure to tune in every Tuesday at 8 p.m. on our streaming apps and check us out on dcnewsnow.com.
And we'll see you then.